I want to tell you the story of a war hero, but not the kind you're used to hearing, at least not in this country. In 1802, when his people first encountered the French explorers on Maria Island, Tongerlongeter would have been a boy of about 12. The French, with their scientists and gadgets, were the Apollo astronauts of the early 19th century. Tongerlongeter's people didn't even know foreigners existed. They saw them not as men, but as ancestors returned from the dead. And it was a belief that persisted long after the French had weighed anchor and the British had begun clawing their way into Tongerlongeter's country. For the most part, the newcomers were young male convicts, some of whom took to preying on Aboriginal women. Tongerlongeter lost his first wife that way. It was an insult no warrior could abide. Initially, the retribution was targeted, but the violence soon spiralled out of control. By 1828, it was all-out war. That year, Tongerlongeter's warriors killed 42 of the invaders, though they probably lost twice that number themselves in the incessant night ambushes by gangs of white men. Incredibly, despite grave losses, their resistance in scope and effectiveness grew with every single year. Panic took hold on the frontier, and the governor was forced to take extreme action. In September 1830, he initiated the Black Line. To this day, the largest military offensive ever on Australian soil. 2,200 soldiers, settlers and convicts in a vast human cordon, contracting over 7 weeks around southeast Tasmania. It was designed to capture Tongerlongeter's people, the Oyster Bay Nation, and their neighbouring allies, the Big River Nation. These people just slipped on through. The greatest empire in human history that played its ace card and lost. As he escaped the Black Line and headed for the Central Plateau, Tongerlongeter encountered a group of woodcutters. They ran away, as often happened, but this time they came back. Tongerlongeter woke that night to the crack of muskets on all sides. 2 men and 3 women were killed, and Tongerlongeter's arm was shattered by a musket ball. The survivors ran into the night, but the chief didn't make it far. His comrades sliced off what remained of his once powerful limb. They ground down the splintered bone with abrasive rock, and they cauterised the stump in the fire. Miraculously, he survived. And as he recuperated that summer on the high country, he and his wife, Drumtimacha, conceived a son who was born around October 1831, a delicate flame kindled from the dying embers of a once great nation. God knows how they would have felt bringing a child into such a world. It must have seemed to them like the closing days of the apocalypse. But New Year's Eve 1831 brought a surprise reprieve. The missionary, George Augustus Robinson, aided by Aboriginal envoys, made contact with Tongerlongeter in the high country. He offered terms of peace from the governor, and the chief accepted. 7 days later, all of Hobart came out and watched in awe as the last 16 warriors, unbroken, spears in hand, walked down Elizabeth Street to meet the governor. An agreement was reached. The war was over. And not long after, the survivors were on board a ship bound for Flinders Island, and what they had agreed would be a temporary exile. The voyage was rough. They were distressed and seasick, and they shook the bones of their ancestors as their homeland receded. Drumtimacha, desperately dehydrated, was unable to breastfeed, and she looked on helplessly as her son faded. As they docked on Flinders Island, the child's tiny body went limp. A great wailing went up. It wasn't just that a child had died, or even that it was the child of a chief. It was that there were no more children. The grieving parents made an amulet of the child's skull, and Tongerlongeter wore it around his neck for the next 6 years. This man had lost nearly everything. His arm, his country, almost everyone he had ever known, and yet he never wavered. In exile, he united remnant tribes and became the settlement's overall leader. Officials recognised this and renamed him King William after the reigning British monarch. As fate would have it, both leaders died on exactly the same day. One in a lavish castle, the other in a drafty hut on an accursed island at the edge of the known world. Tongerlongeter's funeral was the largest ever seen at the settlement, a fitting tribute to the greatest resistance fighter in Australian history. Those who witnessed it would not have been surprised to learn that this great man's resting place is today the site of an impressive memorial to the heroes of the Black War. Now, everything I've just told you is true, at least insofar as the historical sources reveal it. Everything except that last bit. There is no memorial on Flinders Island or anywhere else. Tongerlongeter's grave is unmarked, and along with the other heroes of the Black War, he lies beneath a field of thistles. It's a queer thing.